actually, that's good. So actually, one of his projects that I'm sure he will probably show today is a project called MIRA, M-E-R-A, that if I'm not wrong, it was developed in during the context of the New Normal program in Moscow 2 years ago. And the project redefine or tries to redefine the territory of the Caspian Sea based on, instead of geopolitical logics of borders or countries, are based in logics of watersheds and the dynamics relationship like they offer, right? So he worked also in different design studios, like the architecture company Escape in New York, and he co-designed the Ecological Citizens exhibition for the US Pavilion that happened in the Venice Biennale in 2018. Also joining us from CURE is Liza Dorrer. Liza is an architect from the St. Petersburg University in Russia. And she's also part of the, she's part of the faculty, and she was a former member of the New Normal cohort at the Strelka Institute in Moscow. And from 2018 to 2020, she has been the main tutor of the terraforming program in the Strelka Institute, also in Moscow. Currently, she is doing a PhD in public policy at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And I know that her research interests are mainly focused around urban technologies and personal data governance and their relationship with the city framework. So thank you so much, guys, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we are eager to see what you have for us tonight.
Hi, hi everyone. Thank you for having us. I don't know, Liza, do you want to say a few words before I start the presentation, or?
No, I think the floor is yours. Today I'm mostly the observer, so I'm really excited about the kick-off of this course. So I'm fully, I'm totally okay with the introduction that Eduardo gave us. I'm ready to hear your intro.
Okay, let me share my screen. Do you guys see our presentation?
Yeah.
All right. So as Eduardo mentioned, we're Center for Urban Resilience and Ecology. It's a relatively new department within Strelka KB. And we're very excited to working with you and exploring potential futures of the post-carbon within Moscow. So let me briefly introduce the company first. Strelka is actually, it's an ecosystem of companies, or like a family of companies. It's a group of companies working in the interest of society. And it started out as a nonprofit educational organization. And then later on, one of the alumni founded Strelka KB, which is a for-profit activity. And like, together they form a public benefit corporation or company where Strelka KB is funding the Strelka Institute through its commercial activities. And we have more than 200 people at Strelka KB and many alumni at Strelka Institute. And Eduardo, myself, and Liza are all alumni of Strelka Institute. So when it comes to Strelka KB's approach to our projects, we approach it from, as in Russian, it's 3 Ps. It's processes, people, and places or spaces. And on the right, you can see some of the examples of our interests or where kind of the fields where we are working at. And some of the examples of the key products that we produce, or you can see them on the screen. I'm not going to list them all, but it's mostly strategies, master plans, legal frameworks, standards, guidelines for developing cities around Russia and CIS countries and beyond. So one of the biggest projects that KB did in Moscow was kind of a repedestrianization of the public realm of the streets. It's the project that was called My Street or Moscow Street Program, where being a post-Soviet city, like the biggest post-Soviet city, the city was favoring the automobile or cars. And this is what the urbanists in Moscow inherited kind of from the post-Soviet, from the Soviet Union, and the KB played the key role in kind of making the city more pedestrian friendly, developing the public realm of the city. So I'm also admitting some people into the lobby at the same time, so kind of pausing sometimes. Some of the other work that we do are the guidelines, and you can see the Moscow Street redesign. So it's not just the projects; it's more like we try to think systemically, try to create the systems, try to create the guidelines and standards for housing, for public space, for streetscape, and so on. Okay, and. Yes, and then another examples are the master plans or like the strategies, visions of the 2030. Here's an example of one of the cities, Svobodny. So those were just some examples of the work that we do, just to give you an idea. And in short, I would describe Strelka as a kind of organization that is responding to the challenges that cities are facing in the 21st century. And the biggest challenge, of course, that the cities are facing today is, of course, climate change. And this chart that we're seeing here of the IPCC FIFA assessment report is telling us one important thing, is that there's no longer one future that can be expected. We have all of these projections and all of these kind of possible scenarios in the futures that might happen depending on how the countries are going to behave in the future. So as designers, as architects, urban designers, the way we need to respond to that is no longer with one type of solution. It has to be more flexible, it has to be scalable, it has to be kind of, it has to come through phases. So not to do like one top-down approach that will fit all the cities at once. And then later on, we'll find out that the scenario went the other way, and we need to rebuild everything, reconstruct everything, restructure everything. So we need to be flexible. We need to be more imaginative, more creative. As I said, this means that 4 scenarios, or there are actually more scenarios in the 6th assessment report that IPCC will be releasing, is coming out, I think, next year. There's going to be more scenarios. What we're seeing is actually we have different planets, basically, that we're designing for. And different planets from the point of view of the temperature, and different planets from the point of view of the amount of precipitation that we'll be getting. So what are the design interventions in the cities that could be ready for any of those cases? Because we cannot not do anything. We actually need to do, we need to adapt more than any other time in history, but we need to adapt, keeping in mind that we don't necessarily know exactly what levels are we adapting to. And the way it's kind of manifesting itself, the climate change is manifesting itself within Russia, is first of all through the shocks, the kind of big events that are felt throughout the country, and you can see on the news like big flooding, forest fires in Siberia, or landslides also in far east parts of Russia. And we spoke about the shocks and then to the everyday stresses that we're experiencing within the cities in different parts of the country. First of all, it's the flooding every time it rains heavily, because the infrastructural system that was designed in the 19th, 20th century can no longer withstand the amount of precipitation that we're getting today. And every time it rains in Moscow, we get a lot of water on the streets, basically. Also, heat island effect, and then raising temperatures. You might think that Russia is a northern country and you're not going to feel this. But actually, in Chelyabinsk, one of the coldest cities in Russia, a couple of summers ago, it was so hot that the asphalt was melting. And another challenge that we're facing within Russia is thawing permafrost. So the permafrost, the soil that supposed to be permanently frozen, is actually thawing due to the climate change. And it's actually releasing methane, which is also greenhouse gas, and it's kind of accelerating the process of climate change. So basically, on the bigger scale, what we're looking at as a Center for Urban Ecology, Resilience and Ecology within KB, we're looking at flooding around Russia, and also you might think that flooding might not be the big of an issue for a country such as Russia, because there are not that many coastal cities, but actually precipitation is one of the main causes of the flooding in the cities across Russia. Also, permafrost, as already mentioned, a lot of cities, like 60% of the country, is actually built on this permafrost that is thawing, and it's a lot of areas becoming increasingly unstable, and the infrastructure can kind of buckle. And what we saw in the picture a couple of slides back, where a portion of a building can collapse because the foundation is no longer stable. Roads, railroads is also vulnerable to that. Also, here's the infrastructure and the areas of the Russia that are more vulnerable. So the reds are the areas where the permafrost is thawing even at the higher rate. The bubbles are different power stations across the country, and then the size of them represents the power that they're producing. So what are the tools that we're using at Strelka to tackle these issues? First of all, we need to look at the data, and we developing this tool. It's called Urban Metrics. It's basically kind of a GIS tool for people who don't necessarily know how to use the tool, how to use the GIS in general. And we understand that the tool is necessary for decision makers, for architects, urban designers to kind of work with in order to address these challenges. And then Urban Metrics is allowing people with less experience working with the software to actually have the access to the data that we're constantly collecting. Also, to look at a city from like a top-down approach is, of course, not enough. You need to see what's happening on the ground, on the bottom. What is the community saying? And then there's another tool that is called What Cities Want. It allows the community to actually engage in a dialogue with the decision makers, stakeholders, and we can see what people are saying about different types of issues and actually visualize them and help the politicians, mayors, or whatever, to see the problems that are what they look like on the ground, and maybe reveal some issues that were previously unknown. I'm just gonna skip through some projects through our process very fast, because I don't want to like go into details. It was one of the projects that we worked on was an eco trail project between three medium-sized cities. And what we looked at while analyzing the landscape is that the landscape and the religion is actually, they're closely related in this area. And we saw that an opportunity to kind of, this is an opportunity to bring in some of the landscape solutions or typologies as not only kind of green infrastructure tools, but also as a cultural tool. We looked at the landscape itself, what was happening among the cities, and what we realized was that a lot of the agricultural fields that were around this area were not used for a very long time. So they were essentially abandoned, they were like derelict. So we were proposing to actually reforest some of these areas. And what another thing that we realized was that the agricultural land that was used was actually intertwined with small creeks and rivers that when it rained, all of the pollutants and pesticides from the agricultural fields would enter those smaller creeks and smaller kind of streams and enter the bigger rivers. So essentially, every time it rains, the agricultural fields were polluting the rivers. And it was happening because there was a buffer zone between the river or a stream and the agricultural land. And we were proposing to kind of restore these riparian buffers, these vegetated buffers that would basically slow down the surface runoff and filter it out. And perhaps if we would develop this network of interlinked, interconnected vegetated buffer areas, they could potentially become the armature for the future eco-trail or kind of the infrastructure for the tourists to go from one city to another, because this practice already exists. A lot of them are pilgrims that are walking from one city to another. And they're doing it right now on the road, and what we were proposing doing it on the landscape. Is Eduardo trying to tell me to speed up? Hi.
Not at all. Like take your time.
Okay. You let me know if I'm like taking too long.
I mean, the stage is yours, so just feel free.
Okay, so here, this is another kind of a research that we did. We were looking at the flood resiliency within Russia, and one of the bigger examples that happened fairly recently was in Irkutsk Oblast or Irkutsk region. A few cities, a few towns were flooded at once due to heavy snow melting, and the dam in the city of Toulon did not hold the increased amounts of water, and it basically burst, flooding the entire city and killing 25 people. So what we were thinking is that what are some possible events that led to this disaster, not only kind of the flawed infrastructure, but also perhaps deforestation that happened within the watershed, right? So the less vegetation you have in the watershed, water basin, the less water can the roots basically hold. So simply speaking, less vegetation, more water. And we looked at the areas that were deforested since 2001. We realized it was a huge portion of the watershed, and perhaps proposing to reforest this area can minimize the risk of flooding in the future. But that's not it. You cannot just plant some trees and kind of avoid the flooding at all. You perhaps need to look at the way water is traveling through the landscape and maybe use that pattern of water traveling through the landscape and design on top of that. So instead of actually trying to keep the water out of the city, try to let the water enter the city and let it flood some of the areas during the kind of some events, flood events, and use this area as a public space when the water is not at the high level. This was actually not an actual proposal or project. This more was a vision for a city that suffered through a big flood event. But unfortunately, they're like going with a different route. They're building another dam, and we made this platform where we were talking about an alternative approach to flood mitigation, and instead of building dams and levees, perhaps we can think about giving the space to the water and using that space multifunctionally during other events, not flood events. So, and it became kind of a series of our little articles, little platforms that we release into the public. And one other one was about the study about the green roofs, basically living roofs within Russia. And we were like creating this roadmap for a city member that could basically try to open his own roof. What does he need to know and do? Very recently, we actually did another kind of look or study at the algae bloom, at the harmful algae bloom at the Kamchatka Peninsula. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was a pretty hot topic in Russia. And there was actually this whole conversation about whether it was some kind of conspiracy where some government vessel or something caused, some oil leak caused a lot of animals to die out. And we wanted to see if there's anything that we can see through the satellite imageries. We used the Sentinel satellite imagery to actually find out that it was indeed harmful algae bloom. And we used an algorithm that kind of is being used in Florida, parts of the United States and Korea to monitor harmful algae blooms. This topic is actually still very hot, and people are still arguing about what might have caused that. And even when we released the imagery, it was still kind of people said it was photoshopped and it was not real. So it's not the end of the story. And I think if we are meeting until the end of the or the beginning of the summer, maybe I will keep you up to date about this. So, okay, this was like kind of me ranting about what we're doing in the center, and you probably want to hear what are you going to do with us. And here's the Strelka Kibi and you guys, colleges of the artificial post-carbonscapes. And I just wanted to briefly talk about the sites as you probably already looked at them and read a little bit about them. So GES 1, which is, it translates as, if you literally translate it as a federal power plant number 1, it's actually the oldest power plant and functioning power plant within Russia. It still provides electricity and heat to the center of Russia. It actually provides heat and electricity to the Kremlin. And across the street, across the river, you can see the Zaryadye Park, which is a very popular new landscape park, which we also participated in designing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing that this power plant is still functioning because there's a GES 2, which is on the other side of the island, is being transformed as we speak into an art center. And this is what we're seeing, like not necessarily only in Russia, but actually all around the world, is that a lot of the post-industrial buildings are becoming either art centers or condominiums or something kind of fancy that maybe even triggers this influx of wealth into the neighborhoods and sometimes become triggers of gentrification or something. So a question maybe here, can a power station or can an industrial building still remain an industrial building in the post-carbon world? Does it have to be a condominium? Does it have to be a museum or an art center? Can it still provide energy in the post-industrial world? Can it still be functioning? And what would it look like then? You know, so that's basically first questions, and we can open to the Q&A after the list of the pictures, and we can discuss the sites more in detail. So the Kievsky railway terminal. It's one of the biggest railway terminals in Moscow, and it's one of the unofficial kind of symbols of Moscow. It's one of the beloved railway terminals for sure. If I would compare it to like a New York, it would be the Grand Central of Moscow. And here again, what would this railway terminal look like in the post-carbon kind of transportation, with the post-carbon transportation systems? I don't know how far we're looking at in the future, but if we're talking about, I don't know, different types of transportation modes that perhaps can help us replace flights that we are using as a society, and I don't know, maybe it becomes a terminal for the Hyperloop system that, you know, replaces airplanes. What does it look like in the future? Can we keep it as a railway terminal? Can we keep it looking similarly to what it looks like now? Because there's going to be a riot if we change too much of the facade of this building, and still kind of enter this new century. Essentially, what's happening right now in Russia in general is that what you're seeing in the when it comes to railway systems and trains is that when you're on the train, it seems like you're in the 21st century. It's a pretty modern, contemporary train with Wi-Fi and all of this, and it's looking very shiny. But once you step out of the train, it seems like you're traveling back into the past, because a lot of those railway terminals, they're built a long time ago, and they're not as shiny or bright or new or renovated as the trains themselves are, right? And this is not the worst example, of course. This is actually a pretty good looking, pretty good kept, well kept building. But still, what would happen if the trains and our railway system as an infrastructure changes? What happens to this node? What does it look like? How can it accept this new kind of generation of the same system? Okay, and then the third one that we were looking at is the Chlebzavod number 9, which means basically bread factory number 9. And that's an example of an industrial building or industrial complex that became an art center. I don't know if you probably have this in Spain. We definitely had, I encountered that a lot in New York, where a lot of the industrial complexes were lost. And I'm saying lost you know, from the point of view of the city, because what I'm going to step back a little bit and just talk about New York for a second. But what was happening in New York, you had all of these industrial buildings, industrial complexes, and they were turned into shiny, bright condominiums and art centers and all of this, which was fine for some time. But then the city realized that they're actually losing industrial zoning. Like there were no longer industrial jobs in the city anymore, and then they were struggling to keep them. What they came up with, and then maybe you want to Google that if you're interested in something like this. It's called IBZ, industrial business zones, where Brooklyn Navy Yard, for example, an area that was producing ships, was under in danger of being transformed into condominiums and art centers yet again. But the city came up with this new regulation that allowed Brooklyn Navy Yard to remain an industrial area, but in the industrial area that belongs in the 21st century, for essentially. They called it an industrial park. You can Google Brooklyn Navy Yard and see what's happening there. There's a lot of kind of spaces for little startups and engineering firms that are trying to develop prototypes. So and instead of kind of seeing it as this conveyor belt where they were producing something like ships, right, one after another one, they created and then kind of a hub of prototyping of the future technologies, right? So they were seeing that maybe as a competition to Silicon Valley. They wanted to create this Brooklyn Tech Triangle that would be a competition to Silicon Valley. So maybe there's a possibility for developing a similar story here, where what is the footprint? Like one scenario is that imagine that the art center never happened and it became something else, or it did happen and then it was evolved into another thing again. So just like it was industrial, then it was turned into an art center, place for recreation with a lot of cafes and galleries and so on. And then later on, it was evolved again back into this hybrid of an industrial area and a recreational area. Something that maybe what was they were doing in Brooklyn neighborhood. So it doesn't have to be that. I'm just kind of kicking ideas here. But basically the idea of the prototyping could be interesting. What is the food system, right? What is the food factory or food production be like in the post-carbon society? And what is the role of part of that system, right, of that infrastructure, and what does it look like as a building, essentially? So wanted to also kind of slip this phrase into the presentation. It's Andrea Kahn. She's an urban theorist. She used to teach at Columbia GSAP. And I like the saying, it's instead of defining urban site in a narrow lexical sense, these concepts activate gaps between sign and meaning to characterize urban sites as especially elastic and temporarily provisional. So urban sites are comprised of multiple fields, areas under design control, areas of influence, and areas of effect, each delimited according to its own operational horizons. So basically, I think the most important thing here is that a site is not just an area that is kind of drawn into a loop on the map. So it's not a box or a perimeter that we see on the map and say that this is my site and everything up like within it is my site and I work with it, and then everything outside of it is not. And I do not care about that. What we see here is that she's essentially saying is that you have an area that is under your design control, an area of influence, right? So this other territory that will be influenced by your design, essentially, and the areas of effect. So what I'm kind of going to or leading to is that these three sites are actually not the buildings themselves, which, yes, they are, of course, it's your area of the design influence, but also they become part of the systems, right, of the food system, energy system, and transportation system in the post-carbon world. So in a way, when you would have to propose a design for any of these buildings, you also need to understand what is the system that they are part of in the future. So I'm not saying that you need to redevelop the future here or like reimagine the world, but you need to have an understanding of how your building relates to the world within which it will be kind of placed. Yeah, this is pretty much it. And we can talk more about some of these sites or maybe the idea of the systems. But I wanted to end on that. The site is, yes, it is the building, but it's not really the building. It's the way this building is reacting to the future conditions, and also maybe see it as a prototype for the future kind of development. So if this is the railway station of the, I don't know, 22nd century, then it can perhaps be the prototype for the other railway terminals. Or if this is the power station that can remain the power station and it switches from natural gas to something else, then it perhaps becomes the prototype for other power stations. And the same thing for the food system. So this is it. I think I've been talking a lot. I'm going to stop sharing. Yes.
That was pretty cool, Nabi. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I think it was very in depth about what you guys do there in KB, especially in the center, and I think that you gave a pretty good tips around what do you expect from the students in regarding the uses, the possible uses, and the possible projects that they are going to develop during the next few months. So I will open now to the Q&A session. There are some questions already in the chat. So I'm going to invite the person who wrote them to just stop muting yourself and do please the question like out loud, if you don't mind. So maybe,
yeah. Borja, could you, yes. Borja Maristani? Thanks.
Yeah, we'll start. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very amazing, the lot of data that you showed us. And I was interested in all of this urban data and tools that you showed us at the beginning. And I was asking myself, like, because we were researching a lot, the students, and we were finding limited data for now. So would it be possible to get some of these data or tools from you so we can research and analyze the city much more thoroughly or deeply? That was my first question. I have a second question, but maybe, well, I'll say it. It is just we're having some trouble finding some models for the like the buildings, these three buildings that we chose. So maybe you could also like tell us or give us some tips on how to like draw in 3D all these sites and buildings. Thank you.
Yes. Do I answer right away? Okay. So with the urban data and tools, well, you can maybe give me the, if we're talking about GIS data, for example, of the layers, shape files or the geotiffs, you can tell me which ones you would want to have, and I can provide them. I'm not sure if I can provide the access to the actual tools right now. I will check on that, but in any case, anything that you will find in the tools, I can actually produce for you. Not produce, but like load, export. Yes, and then when it comes to the people or the community, what they're saying, that works a little bit differently because we will have to like create this. It almost becomes this new project, and we have to create this as a question and then spread it across the community so they respond. So I'm not sure if we can use the community layer on this, but we can definitely export any GIS data that is relevant to you. So I think we already sent some layers, but if they are too basic and you need something and you're looking something in very particular, just let me know, and we will let you know if it is possible to export or not. And also about the models, it was a little bit challenging finding the CAD drawings for the buildings. I did find a 3D model for sale for one of the sites, but I'm not sure if that's kind of that it was like too detailed, and it seemed a bit unfair to the other sides to kind of release that. But we'll see. Give us a little bit more time on like trying to find out more CAD drawings. Maybe we can actually approach the building or the building itself, you know, and people who work there. Maybe they can give us the CAD file. Yeah, and well, you mean like if building in 3D, I think Rhino can work pretty well. If you if you have well, I'm a bit old school, and we had snapshots of the whatever drawing we could find, and kind of trace it in Rhino and kind of extrude cap. Trim. So,
but also to give you a hand here, Nabi, we make and organize. So we know we're asking you guys, I'm talking for the group now, that you have to operate kind of like forensic architecture here. Like forensic architecture doesn't have the models of the buildings that they work with, right? They create those models through different kind of media material that they recollect. And I think that has a collective work for you to do in the first week is something that we wanted you to do, but also I can give you like an advance of, we are trying to organize a brief like journey around the buildings. Some of them, the building that we can go in with some friends that are living currently in Moscow. So maybe we can give you like the video of the journey through the building. So maybe with that will help you to actually build, like if you were forensic architecture, the model of the building more properly.
And I can add that there are some people that are asking, for example, for the architects that they were doing the refurbishment of the bread factory, for example, also to the website designers of the place and so on, in order to get the 3Ds that they were using into the websites and they were telling us, Eduardo, before you get it in our class this afternoon, that they were writing them emails and they are waiting for a response. And I think they have just written 10 emails to different 10 people. I think they will get any response at all. And like the video game, like a company that they have sent it to us, the train station 3D. It's a basic one, but they can manage with it. I think it's.
And when it comes to the details of the structure and the building itself, I don't think like I'm not necessarily interested in building be extremely precise the existing one, right? So I'm more interested. If you get the structure right and the right spacing between the columns, that's good enough for me, I think. You know, you don't have to go too crazy about reconstructing all of the details of the existing building. I think more interesting would be the actual idea, right? So the story of the system, where it went, and how your building reacts to the system, right? Yeah, I wouldn't spend my semester kind of recreating the building and then having that as the final project. Yeah.
Sorry to step in with a question. No, because I think we are focusing too much and the tools we need to start, and we have to remind that we have in front of us the client, and we're asking him to give us the data. I'm sure we are gonna manage, and in one way or another, we're gonna be able to get those data. But I think we can't spare this opportunity to make good questions about the client expectations, or maybe even some clues about things that cannot be measured, but which Nabi and Liza can tell us about. I don't know, Russian society, Russian business tissue,
or whatever is going to impact our design idea, which is some information that is even more difficult to get. This was like
a suggestion.
a suggestion for the students more than a question.
Yeah, so maybe we can keep going because I think there are like a lot of questions appearing in the chat box. So maybe next one is Angel, I think.
Yes. Yes.
I was wondering if it was possible to find the data about the energy produced by the factory. As you were saying, it was interesting to maybe maintain its functionality about the generation of energy or the energy produced. I thought it would be interesting if that data was available in some way, at least in a more general way.
Yeah. That's actually, I did come across this number. I will send you this number. But also I would think, well, my question would be, why do you want to know that? Not because you don't need to know that. No, it's just, I'm curious, why would you want to know this?
Because I thought it could be interesting just to like make an approach to that number, maybe not trying to get to that number, but with more sustainable activities or forms of producing energy, trying to get close to that, or at least maintain that quality of energy production, even if it's not the main use of the building.
Yeah, that's the answer I was hoping for. Yeah, that's because if you would start thinking about that, like, okay, how much energy does it produce now? And then if I transfer it into different, or like evolve it into a different source of energy, first of all, what type of energy, and how much of that do I need to place in the building?
Yeah, exactly. That was my concern.
That would start giving you an idea about the space requirements, right? And maybe you'll make decisions between solar will not work or wind doesn't work, something like this. But also I think it was like in the very beginning when we spoke to this about this with Eduardo, one of the ideas that came to my mind was, well, first of all, and I'm not expecting that you would probably answer this, but what is this world of the post-carbon? How did we get there? You know, because I'm very interested of getting there. And if you, you know, just are we kind of waking up one day and we are in the post-world, post-carbon, or we are actively trying to describe this journey, and your building, your design becomes part of that journey. In other words, perhaps to get to the post-carbon, it's no longer necessary, it's no longer enough to replace the same amount of energy from fossil fuels or to the sustainable source, right? But perhaps this building needs to do more than just become sustainable, because sustainable by definition in itself, it means it doesn't do more than it needs to, like, right? It's like this net zero. It means that it will not make more energy than it has to, or it will basically, if it pollutes, it will clean up the same amount that it pollutes. Like it's always it's the net zero concept. And is this enough? Also, perhaps the building can also do something extra, maybe more, right? There's this great graph. I forgot the guy's name, but basically he shows the spectrum, right? The gradient from the degenerative systems to the regenerative systems. And the idea that the degenerative systems, this is where we are today, right? Using the fossil fuels and so on. And then the sustainability is actually in the middle of that, meaning that everything that we're talking about, sustainability, it's actually bringing everything to the net zero. And the argument is that that's not enough, because first of all, not everyone will be doing that. And who knows when we actually get to this point. And maybe at that point, we need to go actually extra and create regenerative systems. So perhaps it's not only the sustainable building, but I don't know, maybe it has some kind of infrastructure within the facade that is capturing CO2 from the air or something like that, right? Maybe it does this extra steps, extra things. And it shows us that as a prototype, this building kind of shows that a power plant that was in responsible, well, it was part of the system that was responsible for releasing CO2 into the atmosphere is now actually taking that CO2 from the atmosphere, right? So that becomes the power station, the power plant of the future, that it not only produces the energy, which it did before, but it also produced CO2. Now in the future, it's actually taking the CO2 out of the atmosphere, right? So maybe also we can think about these things as well. But it's all also up to you again.
But just to answer the question, the capacity is 76 megawatts. Megawatts.
Thank you.
But I think the kind of theoretical and conceptual background that Nabi gave is more essential than this number. But if you are interested in the numbers, it's 76 megawatts.
Yes, what she said.
Thank you,
Should
guys.
we go?
Yeah, to the next one. Chema, the stage is yours.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation and all the data that you have already given to us. My concern is more about society and how people has been lived in Russia, is living right now and will live in the future. I have found very interesting the chain that you have written about. That was the main necessities that the people like half century ago, that was food, energy and transport. But I think that all of us are being prepared for being architects in the present and in the future. So I would like to know your opinion or your probably prediction about which one will be the steps in the chain that we have to project for in the actual Russia and in the actual Moscow and in the future one. Thank you.
I think maybe Liza wants to say something. I'm sure she has been thinking about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question since I saw it in the chat box. My first reaction, and actually didn't change that much. I think like all three of those are essential. It's hard to distinguish which is more kind of fundamental. Like for this project, I think it will more depend on what you think is more interesting to you. From myself, I can add that I would probably expand the transport domain to the kind of consumer behavior, just because of the site. As Eduardo said, some of you know that this place is not just a train station, but also like next to this train station, there's a big mall. So this site can be read not just as a place to explore transportation, kind of like field or area, but also just consumerism behavior. There's a huge it's called European Mall just next to it. It's one of the most, I think it's the most visited mall in Russia, and second to Dubai. So maybe this kind of relationship between the travel, the movement of goods and peoples, and like people can be seen as one. Just the meaning of this kind of transit in general energy flows. But yeah, this is just my maybe it's for me it's more interesting part of research on consumers' behavior and transit. Also, I used to live next to this train station, so maybe this is why I'm more interested in this place. But I like personally, I would not distinct any of those three directions as more important. Maybe Nabi has another kind of reading of that, but I don't think that you can actually estimate which of those. Probably energy is most kind of like large scale issue, but in general I won't say that any of those can be called like the priority, like the top
Probably,
like one.
sorry, if probably because I have asked in the wrong way. I was more interesting if I would say which step will you add to this chain? I mean, which one will you assume that will be the next preoccupation or necessity for the people that will live there? I mean, trying to talk in this evolution chain that we have to project for. Probably, I don't know, technology, sex, human behavior. I don't know.
You mean which one would you add to this three?
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, trying to know better which will be the necessities for the people that we have to project for.
Yeah, I need a minute for that.
Sorry.
I think perhaps this this also depends maybe on you. What is the future that you are kind of proposing to us? Because I can sort of propose or like imagine my own future, but then we don't necessarily maybe want you to get into that mindset. We're hoping that you will, because nobody really knows, right? This is the end. This is the question with no definitive answer, and that's the beauty of that graph, I guess. About the graph that I showed about the possibilities and the different types of futures is that there's so many of them, right? So perhaps maybe that the approach of not trying to create for one specific future is also applicable, right? As well, in theory, if we look back a little bit on the theories, that a lot of these issues that we're dealing with were created by the architects and urbanists that were so sure about the future, and they knew that the cars was the answer, right? And then perhaps they were like questioning themselves the same. They were asking themselves the same question that you just asked, like, is going to be the main needs of the human of the 21st century? Then they answer that based on their limited knowledge, because they are, you know, this rich white males that have no access to real people. And then they design top down for everyone with that mindset, right? So perhaps this is not the mindset we need to enter in and be ready for any type of future, but still be in a position where we need to design. And what is the design of this in the age of the uncertainty, in a way? I don't know if I'm kind of skillfully escaping the answer here, but maybe
Completely,
this is
but
the
it's fine.
answer. This is also then, because, well, again, like, right, if we're putting in front of our eyes some definitive future, definitive goal, it's a bit repeating the same mistake that some people did in the middle of the 20th century, where they were so sure about some things, and then we are now realizing that they were wrong, right? But the things that they built were made out of concrete and steel, and we are finding ways of transforming that into something else. can we not be that generation? Can we not be them for the next generation, essentially? And then if we are not going to be, what are the things we need to design? Wow.
Thank you.
Well, I think Laura Bucero, feel free to jump in.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you for being here and for all the very interesting stuff you've told us about. And my question goes a bit in the line of Chema's question about like the steps of production, kind of. So as Nabi was mentioning or was explaining about bakery number 9, it has become like a very hipster, lively urban area with like condos and spaces for office spaces for rent, which is like radically different from the bread factory, of the socialist bread factory. And you were mentioning that maybe like an option would be to return like the previous use, like creating a new like prototyping or food factory. But my question here would be that isn't this like this new hipster neighborhood a factory, a 21st factory in its own way, producing like images and art and media in its own way, like their products in the end. So yeah, like what would your thoughts be on taking this as an opportunity to reflect on this like post-human society, new ways of industrialization and production, rather than substituting this this neighborhood, or thinking about like returning the, how do I say it, like in quotation marks, traditional way of producing like physical things. I don't know if I made it clear, but thank you.
I think I know where you're going, but then, okay, first of all, I think you should do what you're passionate about, because this, in that case, you will get the best project, right? If you're passionate about something, you'll make a better project if instead of a project that I tell you right now to do and you don't care about it, right? You'll give us some mediocre something, right? So we definitely want you to feel passionate and manifest your passion into space design, right? But at the same time, I can ask you a question that all of the factory that you're defining, right? This new kind of type of factory, and we're rethinking all of these systems, and all of this is that there's still, these people still are eating something, right? They eat something that was produced somewhere. And one of the interesting questions is that what is that system looks like, right? Where that he still that person, the user of that space, still gets the hot dog or something from somewhere. What is this hot dog made of, and what went into producing it in the post-carbon world? To me, that seems like a more interesting question than kind of re-investigating meaning of production. But still, I think you can, if you feel strongly about it, you can go that way, but then your answer has to be so amazing that I will forget about my interest in the food systems of the 22nd century, and we will just be, well, that was amazing, and that's okay. It's kind of like you're free to take that risk, but you know, like
it's a challenge.
It just be careful of falling into some cliches, you know, because this, I mean, we were part of the new normal program. I know all about rethinking and rebranding and reimagining everything, right? But then in the end of the day, the most interesting projects were the ones that were actually answering
Yeah, the brief, basically.
the essential questions, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but if I may, I would add to this, like when you're saying about like this alternative industries of, for example, image making or like some digital cloudy stuff, which is somewhere, nowhere, you are doing like some ephemeral things, like concentrating on the physical aspect of any digital action is also something to think about. Like we're very much used to thinking that any digital labor is abstract somewhere there in the cloud. It's like something that you cannot touch, right? But actually it's tied to pretty much physical activities, like it's like the computation, the data centers, the cables on the bottom of the ocean. It's the physical infrastructure, and when you are designing something, sending a file to another country, it consumes so much energy. It actually produces a lot of heat. It produces some carbon, and this abstract digital labor is actually very, very physical. So this might be some kind of strand of research on this, like just maybe trying to embody or like to depict the actual physical meaning of digital labor. This might be something interesting to research on. And also I think that food production now, like the designed food, and maybe looking into how food right now is like, we have this bread factory, old school thing, and just comparing it to the food industry today, also thinking of what this food industry can be in some years from now is also very interesting. Like, can it fit to the urban environment right now? What is actually that we're eating? Like, are we eating bread? Are we eating, like, I don't know, crickets? And what should we eat to kind of preserve the carbon balance today? Can we do it in the city? Should we do it in the city? And this kind of things. I think it would be beautiful to kind of put this thinking into this box of previously this former bread factory. Might be something to look into.
Actually, to give you, maybe I can jump in here, like just for a moment, but if for those that are working in the factory, I invite you to check a project that actually we did with Liza during this year at the Terraforming program, which is called Black Almanac, that thinks about how the industry of food production has to change in order to feed 9 billion people. That's going to be the number of human beings in the planet in 20 years. Because I don't know if the name is correct, but around 60% of human emissions are due to methane produced by the cattle. So actually, this kind of multi-scalar issues around big scale flows of carbon in this case, so it is interconnected with a specific food market in that sense. So I can share with you guys the link of the project in the chat in a bit.
Yeah, the most curious part of this research is about what we think of when we think of like nice food, like when we think of this all flavors, like the bread, the pasta, I don't know, all the things. Like actually, I don't know, like 90% of what we eat is actually like super like designed in labs, in factories, produced to be like designed to be produced fast, consumed nicely, and it's all designed. It looks like your grandmother like baked it, but actually it's a part of like huge logistical chain, production chain, with emission consequences. So it's a kind of big topic to research on.
I can also add about the supply chain, and I love the comment about the cloud, that the cloud is actually physical. So Benjamin Bratton School here. Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. It's just because we don't see portion of a system doesn't mean that that system doesn't exist. So perhaps we can think about visualizing, maybe even in some very simple form, the supply chain, right, of the system, and trying to understand, well, first of all, what is the supply chain of the system in the 22nd century, and where does your building, in your case, take place, right? So in which portion of that supply chain? So for example, it can be, for different projects, it can be different, right? So for one project, it can be the place of the production of the food. For another project, it can be a place where the prototypes for the some portion of the supply chain are produced, right? If we, I don't know, if we're talking about some futuristic greenhouses that will be necessary, or some prototypes of the typology, architectural typology for urban agriculture or something, that those prototypes perhaps could be produced here, or these are where the designers of or engineers of these systems work, and here where they're prototyping that, and then people are still visiting this space as an art space, but the art is being replaced by manufacturing now, or they actually seeing how people are working. So thinking of combining, so like taking the idea of the mixed use, right, to the next level, to the next step. Because mixed use still, like to this day, we say mixed use, but there's not much of the mix if you look at the land use that are combined, right? It's commercial, residential, that's it, right? Some leisure time, some office time, and you have apartments. But if we, for example, talk about why the industries left the cities in the first place, they were removed because of the pollution. And now we're talking about a different type of industry that is no longer polluting. And cities are realizing that having industrial areas within the city is actually beneficial to the economy of the city now, right? But having that industrial zoning now within the city doesn't have to be kind of abrupt, meaning there has to be a buffer zone between residential and industrial, because it's no longer polluting, right? You can actually start mixing commercial, residential, industrial areas. And what are those? So that's on the level of the zoning, but then what is the product of that? What does the building actually look like? Well, again, a bit of New York for you, but you have the industry city, right? And in Brooklyn, that is kind of far away from the city because it's built in an industrial area that was placed outside of residential areas. But people go there because they have a good time there. There's dancing and different types of leisure events, but at the same time, it's still a production area. They make small scale things, but it's still kind of, you can start imagining if you start scaling this up, right? So you have a building that is a manufacturing building, but at the same time, it's a commercial building, because industrial areas nowadays, well, or in the future, doesn't have to be outside of the city, right? And then you start thinking that, and then maybe this is the area where you can slip your reimagining of the factory concept in as well. So there was a lot here, but maybe like imagine what the supply chain looks like understand where does your building within this supply chain, what portion of that supply chain your building, your design will be affecting, and design or like decide the program, architectural program from there, basically.
I think both answers have made quite clear that here rhetorics are not going to work. I mean, just saying that the factory now is the factory of images, it's quite a good thought, but I think our client expects some physical effects of our design approach, and we're actually very good at rhetorics, but I'm afraid it's not the time.
Okay, I think we have a couple of more questions. So Diego Guerrero.
Yes, hello. Sorry about the camera. I don't have, so my Wi-Fi broke down, so I'm with Matt, so no fancy mediums. So I was very interested about how you actually were talking about all these problem solving of the past that always relied on big solutions that tried to anticipate stuff, and by doing so created 50 new problems for the future to have to solve. And so I think, well, you're the study for urban resilience, and it was really clear to me how resilience was applied in more rural environments, which was like trying to promote trying to harness that capacity of resilience for that capacity that nature has for resilience. But it's less clear to me how you think about resilience in a more urban landscape, the urban more traditional sense. I'm talking about like in the midst of a city, do you try to introduce nature back in the city, or do you think about, as you said, a multitude of uses or possible uses? And also, I'm going to kind of tie it to a second question, which was also about how frustrating it might have been to have all this super work proposal that was amazing for the rural area that you presented for preventing future floodings, and having this massive dam be built instead, and how you might have thought about disruption also as a means of creating novelty, not just being about new proposals, but also being about just disrupting the actual model. I don't know if that was clear enough. Sorry, I'm also very rhetorical, as Sylvia said.
Yeah. Well, I think the first question about the urban resilience, well, what is resilience in, because resilience is kind of this terminology that is being thrown around everywhere. And sometimes we lose track of what it actually meant in the beginning. And if we go a little bit back, it's basically you have climate adaptation and you have climate mitigation. And climate adaptation, well, mitigation, it's like this active things that we can do, geoengineering or something. How can we like capture the carbon from the atmosphere and bury it in the ground? These are the mitigation kind of active things. I don't know, direct air capture or something like that. And you have the, so that's mitigation part. And you have the adaptation, where it's about adapting to the reality that we already have, this new reality. And resilience was actually part of that adaptation branch. Examples of that would be using or restoring wetlands as a means of not only carbon capture, but also as a tool to prevent flooding, right? So have areas that could be flooded during kind of high tide or something, or heavy rains, and applying new uses to these areas. Well, that already was the architectural kind of thinking on top of that. So basically, resilience was from the branch of the climate adaptation, and one of the primary or like very heavily used examples is like the wetlands, the whole idea of the urban wetlands that was helping the cities to adapt to the heavy rains that new amounts of precipitation that the cities are getting, and so on. And then once you take that kind of basic foundation of the resilience, you start developing it as an architect or urban designer or landscape architect, and saying, what else can a wetland be, right? Or how can a wetland or something like wetland be within an urban fabric? So for example, looking at a natural section of a river in the natural environment, and we see that the river has riparian buffers that prevent pollution entering the river, or the root system that is located at the embankment or at the edge of the river is actually naturally reinforcing the bank of the river so it doesn't erode. And you applying that logic into urban environment. So based on that section, you can develop a bioswale, right? That acts or mimics, so biomimicry. So mimics the a riparian buffer and filtrates and holds, slows down the surface runoff that is polluted with the oils and all of this stuff that we have on the sidewalks, right? It filters it out before it enters the swale. Swale holds as much water as it can before it kind of lets the water enter the drainage system that is being there's too much pressure on the drainage system, like the drainage canal channels, that pipes that we have in the city, and they're kind of bursting because they're not designed for this new amount of precipitation. So we start adding these elements to help cities to adapt, which increases the resilience of the city. And the resilience is referred to the ability of the city to kind of bounce back from some critical event, right? Like a flooding, or it could be pandemic. So it can be referred to the kind of ability to bounce back, right, of urban systems. And it also refers to the capacity, what is the capacity of the urban system to withhold this pressure. So the more, I don't, if we're still talking about rains and drainage systems, so the more developed your green infrastructure network, meaning bioswales, bioretention, rainforest gardens, and so on, urban wetlands, and blah, blah, blah. And the more it's developed, the more the system is developed and interconnected, the more resilient your city to heavy rains, right, to the changing climate. That is kind of manifesting itself with increased precipitation, right? That's one part of the how city can be resilient. But then you can apply the same logic to different types of shocks and stresses, right? And the shock stresses are referred to, you have, like when you have the urban system, it has periodical or like constant stresses that are applied on the system. So for example, your public transportation system is malfunctioning, right? It's a stress. Or your, again, like drainage system is overflowing, that's stress. You have high level of unemployment, that's also a stress, right? And then you have, those are constant, right? And then you have shocks, like that happen once in a while, but they always happen, like earthquake or a big flood event or a COVID-19, right? And then you'll see that the more vulnerable your urban systems to the stresses that happen every day, the more vulnerable it will be to the shocks that happen from time to time. So when we talk about resilience, urban resilience, we can talk about implementing landscape strategies, landscape solutions, kind of green infrastructure and so on, but it makes the city resilient to some of these shocks and layers, not all of them, right? You need to also talk about social issues, economic issues, and all of that. And then there's the same logic that is applicable, that you do not, first of all, make something one big, huge thing and you place it in one location, you kind of try to decentralize. You try to have multiple scales of solutions. You have to kind of have multi-layered defenses. Because what we see, and on an example of a flood event again, is that when you have a levee, that's a one-layered solution and can be applied to economics or social issues. You have one thing, one piece of infrastructure, one investment that, I have a sign that my system resources may affect my audio quality. Is my audio quality being affected?
No, but it's working. It was just.
Oh, I was just
just a moment, yeah.
talking.
No. We didn't. We
heard everything.
We didn't lose you. We hear everything.
Please do not repeat. Okay.
No, but actually, you guys can see what happened if you open the Pandora's box with talking about resilience with the director of the Center for Urban Resilience and Ecology. He can talk around this like for a long time. But Diego, also regarding of your question, just to add a bit, and then we can wrap up because I want to be respectful with our guests here. I mean, we call the course and the program Ecologies of the Artificial for a reason. So actually, I think that idea of framing the natural as something that is different of the artificial is one of the, this dichotomical division between natural culture and so on. It's one of the main issues we are framing nowadays in order to arrive into what it will be like a proper global metabolism, right? So I really invite you to like the book that we arranged for you guys. There is, if you take it from the back, there is like a collection of texts, and I invite you to read the first text, which is called Black Natures in Framing the Natural as Technological, that have been written by a friend of us called George Papan, and he will be happy to give you a glimpse about the natural thing if you want. But I invite you to read that text because it will really frame what you were mentioning like, in a proper way. So aside that, I think we don't have like more questions. So I'm going to say thank you again to our guests here, to our clients, to Nabi and Liza. I think have been like a great session, very, very thoughtful answers and very, very interesting presentation. And thank you so much for being with us, even if it's been a half more hour than it was going to be. And even if it is like a free Labor Day in Russia and you're still joining us, Nabi. And Liza, she's right now in streaming from Hong Kong, and it's like 3 a.m. for her, but she's still here with us. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you guys soon in 2 weeks when we have our first review, and you will be able to see the advance of the projects by that time. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.